These are world-class koi. And when you start breeding animals that have multiple genetic mutations, you start to get specific color patterns, specific body shape. They have come up with this really unique mixture of fish. Exactly why these guys are perfect pond pets. Hey, what's up everybody? I'm the Pond Professor here. I am getting ready for an epic journey to the motherland of koi, Japan. So first what I want to do though is understand a little bit more about the subject matter. I'm familiar with koi, but I am by no means an expert. So what I want to do a little bit deeper research on the entire subject. So when I go there, I'm a little bit more educated. So why don't we head up to my office where we can do a little bit more research on where these incredible fish come from and why we love them in our ponds. So I am totally excited about going to this trip to Japan, learning about koi, learning about all the breeding processes, as well as an incredible culture of everything that they've created there, and it's turned it into a worldwide phenomenon, which is really, really cool. So I have been familiar, obviously, with koi for many, many years, just because I've been in the industry for 30 years. But I wanted to put together a little bit of research, or additional research, I should say, on this subject, because I wanted to make sure all the information that I was familiar with is actually true. I wanted to understand a little bit about the area where this all started and how the entire process actually worked through. So here's some of the results of my research. The koi hobby that we know of today, these incredible fish, really kind of the epicenter for all of this was in the Niigata prefecture of Japan. More specifically, the city of Ojiya, which from what I've heard from the team that we're going with, we will be in Ojiya and we're actually going to be in this ground zero space where all of this stuff actually happened, which is kind of cool just to be there, part of that, and actually see what actually makes this tick. Looking at this picture here and understanding the watershed, I think, is the most important thing. That's why I want to start with this. You've heard me talk about this before. An aquatic ecosystem is a reflection of its watershed. And look at this beautiful watershed. I mean, just the hills and the mountainous areas surrounding this entire area is just absolutely beautiful. But from a water quality standpoint, what's actually happening here is these mountains, a brand new mountain range, if it's going to be volcanic or tectonic, whatever it happens to be, is going to be like an upward thrust of just raw rock. And then what happens over time is this rock actually slowly weathers, breaks apart all this rock, and it starts to crumble, and then it actually breaks down into really, really small bits and pieces, and it goes down to the compounds that actually are inside of the actual rock itself. So this is the normal weathering process. And then what occurs, you start to grow things in it, so you have this nice mixture of all these crushed up compounds and the raw materials, and then you start adding in organic matter from leaf debris and from plants and things like that that start growing in those areas. And then over time you get this beautiful soil mixture, a perfect blend of all the right ingredients for life to occur. And that's why this area is really good at not only creating koi, there's a lot of rice paddies in that area, and that's actually what started out the koi industry. And let me explain that a little bit. So what was actually happening is the farmers in that area, they would harvest the rainwater and the snow melt and everything that was coming down these mountains. During that melting process, that water moving through and across the landscape would pick up some of these unique dissolved compounds. They would capture it in these little terraces and they would become flooded. That was a very rich, nutrient-rich mixture of water as well as the soil underneath, which was the perfect opportunity to grow crops. They needed additional sources of protein, so they started to add magoi into these rice paddies. So the magoi, the original black carp, is actually going to be used as a food source for those farmers. So they would have rice and then they'd also have some protein with it. So they would add the magoi into the ponds. Early summer, they would let them grow out and feed on all of the detritus and all that stuff that was inside of the rice paddies. And then they would harvest them out at the end of the season for the fall and winter months. But what I think is really unique about this is when we start looking at the species itself, Cyprinus carpio. So this is the common carp, or actually the Eurasian carp. Now there has been, since this, there is a delineation between koi fish, which I'll show you here in a second. According to this is a university University of Michigan did a little bit of a study on it. They talk about what they fed upon. So these carp are going to live in slow-moving river systems and very wide, deep river systems and backwater sloughs and things like that, which are very nutrient rich. So there's lots of stuff for them to feed upon. And these fish have adapted to that situation. They have adapted to that water quality. They're constantly rooting around on the bottom. So the morphology of the fish, if you look at these guys, Cyprinus carpi over here on the left, you can see it has a ventrally located mouth, which means the mouth is kind of pointing in a downward direction, and it also has these little fleshy protrusions on their side, which are called barbels. Those are actually sensory organs. What they do is they swim along on the bottom of these water features or these water courses, and they're looking for edible compounds. And those little barbels are helping them to distinguish something that's edible versus something that is non-edible. So that's going to be worms, crustaceans, all different types of insects, as well as all types of organic matter, plant matter, algae, different types of aquatic vegetation that would grow down in the bottom. And these fish are omnivorous, so they're going to feed on a wide variety of things, which actually makes them a resilient species that could adapt to a lot of situations, which made them the perfect animal to actually put in these rice paddies, because they could adapt to a lowly oxygenated system, shallow water, but it's very nutrient rich. So these fish had all access to all this stuff that was growing in and around the actual rice plants. Now, there has since been a separate categorization for koi fish, which is on the right, which is Cyprinus rubrofuscus.
What did you say?
So this is actually the delineation for the koi species that we're familiar with, more of a fancy fish. What was happening with the farmers hundreds of years ago, these magoi, every once in a while they'd have a mutation, which is normal. All animals have different genetic mutations that actually occur. These fish would have a genetic mutation, and all of a sudden they'd have some interesting colors or an interesting pattern that was found on the body of the fish itself. And the farmers, instead of eating that particular fish, they would keep it as almost like a pet. So they just liked the way it looked. And what would happen over many years is they would see different genetic variations. They would keep them separately, and then they started to breed the animals that had the genetic mutations together. And when you start breeding animals that have multiple genetic mutations, you start to get specific color patterns, specific body shapes and things like that. So they were able to alter the actual genetic structure of this animal. And because of those changes, they changed the name of it. They actually changed it from the magoi to nishigigoi, which is, I think, is really cool just to understand where that came from. I've always heard the term nishigigoi for many years. In the United States, koi is typically utilized, but everywhere else in the world they use nishikigoi. So if you take that word apart, the goi part is actually carp. Doing a little bit of research, what I found was nishiki is a brocade, which is a beautiful silk or some sort of a fine fabric that has a specific pattern, and it could have raised patterns of gold and silver inside of it. And it's actually what they would make their beautiful kimonos out of. So it's kind of really unique history of actually what's happening. And we're all familiar with those incredible kimonos, the elegance that the women will have when they're wearing those, just incredible. But this is what the koi are actually replicating. The farmers actually came up with this incredible term because it was very descriptive for what they were finding, because they started crossbreeding all these amazing animals to get all these different genetic variations. And this is actually what's happening here. So you can see over here, kind of in the middle left, you're going to see that magoi, and then it started to split off into two main groups. One would be the tetsu magoi, and then also the asagi magoi. And then from there you can see all the different genetic variations as they started crossbreeding between them. And then we have all the amazing things that are available to us today, the otsuris, the kohakus, the showas, the chagois. All these incredible fish actually came from that original parent fish, but through many years of very selective crossbreeding, they have come up with this really unique mixture of fish. And in today's world, these fish are highly valued, especially for the good bloodlines. And that's actually why we're going to Japan. We want to see specifically firsthand how they're actually harvesting these animals, the ponds that they're actually kept in, and the amount of work it's going to take and years to develop all these different bloodlines. It's just unbelievable to me. So you can see here nishigigoi now, literally living jewels. Showas that I have here, unbelievable specimens. Just really an incredible mixture of fish, which is what I love about it. But it doesn't start with those incredibly beautiful fish all the time. You have to go through a selective process to get there. A typical carp or koi species is going to have hundreds of thousands of eggs. So what the farmers are actually doing, it's a commercial farm. They're actually taking these animals out of these mud ponds, bringing them into their greenhouses, the females and the males, taking the eggs directly from the females, and they're going to mix them with the sperm from the males, and they're going to put them on these big racks. And I've noticed this from my personal pond. The eggs are really, really sticky. So when they're in water, they're going to stick and cling to things. That survival strategy. The farmers are actually doing it in these captive situations because they want to increase the odds of survival. So right now, from what I've heard, they're getting like 80 to 85% survival rate, which is unbelievable. And you're not going to find that in nature because of predation that actually occurs in and around aquatic ecosystems. But what that means is if you have hundreds of thousands of babies, the majority of those fish are actually not going to be worthy of that genetic line. So what they're going to do is actually cull them out. They cannot afford to feed hundreds of thousands of fish, and in fact, if they were to let them all grow, they would overwhelm the existing ponds that they have. There would be too many animals in a specific space. So they want to make sure that they have a good, clean bloodline with very specific traits. That first year is actually very critical. Those fish are known as tosai. Tosai means it's within that first year of life. And the fish are going to grow pretty rapidly in that first year. So they're going to constantly be feeding, and they're going to let these small fish out into these large ponds so they could actually just expand and growth like crazy. Then they're going to bring them in, and they're going to cull them out, and they're going to find the best of the best, and then they're going to put them back into those mud ponds to continue moving forward. This is going to take many, many years, and you can see what that traditional koi pond harvest is actually going to look like. It's men and women. They are going to go out with a series of seine nets, and they're going to pull all the captured fish over to an area. They're going to catch them. They're going to bring them into the greenhouses where they could actually go through that culling process, or they're going to bring them indoors during the winter months because that's when they're actually going to sell them. It's also when a lot of the koi buyers are actually going to Niigata, which is why I'm going there with our team as well, so we could be a part of this incredible buying process. Traditional koi pond harvest is going to be an incredible experience. From what I've heard, they're actually going to take us out into these mud ponds, which I'm totally looking forward to because I want to actually see what that harvest is like. But more importantly, I want to see the substrate. Again, I'm kind of that science geeky guy. I want to look at the benthic substrate that these fish are going to be found in, because whenever I'm designing and building something, I go through that mental process where I deconstruct the ecosystem. And what I mean by that is if you were to pull all the water out of an aquatic ecosystem to see what lives inside of it, I want to see the bottom, because it's that soil layer, it's the rocks and the gravel, the silts and the sands and the aquatic vegetation. The mixture of all those things together is what's actually creating the habitat, which is then the home for all the incredible animals that are going to be found in it. I hope you all enjoyed that history lesson as much as I did. Learning about an incredible culture as well as an iconic destination of Japan is just unbelievable. Now what I want to focus on though is the reason for the trip to Japan, which is to learn about these amazing animals. I've caught one of our koi here. This is an utsuri, and what I want to point out, not necessarily the color patterns and that type of stuff on this particular fish. I want to talk about that morphology that I was talking about. Those barbel structures, the location of the mouth. Check that out. So you can see that mouth orientation. You can see those little fleshy protuberances coming out of the bottom. Those are taste organs. So he's constantly searching and feeding down on the bottom of that pond. Exactly why these guys are perfect pond pets, because they're constantly feeding along the entire bottom. But the other reason is, look at that pattern. So the bellies are actually kind of boring in color. There's not a lot of color or anything like that down on the bottom, but that top side is just spectacular. I'm gonna put this guy back in the water because I don't want to stress him out anymore. Catching fish like this on a routine basis is is very important for us. We're always looking at all of our fish to make sure that they're healthy. We want to make sure that the fins look good. We don't want to see any flushing or red inside of the fins. We don't want to see them flashing. We don't want to see puffed out scales. We don't want to see any little sores. So we're constantly looking at the fish, doing our routine feedings. But in here, we're actually kind of have our water temperature a little on the elevated side. The reason being is we're trying to grow these fish out, so we're going to have a little bit warmer water, which is going to get their appetite going, so we could really have some monstrous fish. And I know the fish in here are spectacular, but wait until we go to Japan, because I've seen pictures and it is gonna be phenomenal. These are world-class koi. I am totally looking forward to this next adventure.